It is important to recognize that the attainment of a more fulfilling life is not simply a matter of waiting for things to happen. The acquisition of this skill is contingent on the cultivation of beneficial habits. This particular statement may be the most salient point to take away from the day's discourse. It can be posited that the present state of affairs is a reflection of habitual tendencies, the manner in which an individual behaves, the cognitive processes they engage in, the manifestation of their presence, and the responses they exhibit. In the event of stagnation, disorientation, or mental fatigue, it is imperative to recognize that these are not indications of personal deficiency. This is attributable to the fact that one's habitual daily routine is not conducive to success. It is evident that they are not acting in your best interest. The following assertion can be made with a high degree of confidence. It is possible to effect a radical change in one's mindset by modifying one's daily routine. The present moment is the time for action, not the future. This audiobook presents 10 positive habits that have been proven to effect a transformation in the listener's mindset. These practices are straightforward, unambiguous, and grounded in real-life applications. They have been shown to enhance cognitive function, improve emotional well-being, strengthen focus, and facilitate progress in individuals' lives. The implementation of a single strategy is sufficient to effect a transformation in one's life. The application of all 10 factors has the potential to engender a state of flux. The content is devoid of exaggeration and superfluous information, presenting a straightforward and objective perspective. Instead, it focuses on tangible outcomes and facilitating the attainment of subsequent levels of expertise. Chapter 1. It is imperative to adopt a sense of purposeful urgency in order to optimize temporal efficiency. It is imperative to adopt a sense of purposeful urgency in order to optimize temporal efficiency. The following assertion may be considered elementary, however, it constitutes one of the most significant alterations an individual is likely to effect in their lifetime. On a daily basis, individuals awaken and proceed to exit their beds without having any conception of what they are undertaking. There is an absence of direction, urgency, or rationale underpinning their actions. It is at this point that the majority of individuals encounter difficulties. This is not due to a lack of intelligence or talent. Rather, it is a consequence of their approach to the day, which is characterized by a sense of indifference. In such circumstances, the passing of time is greatly accelerated, and the day is perceived as passing very quickly. It is imperative to adopt a mindset in which the gravity of one's actions is recognized, as the consequences of these actions can be life-altering. This day is unique and will not be repeated. It is important to note that these hours cannot be recovered. It is imperative to utilize this opportunity to construct a substantial edifice. For once this period has elapsed, the opportunity will be irretrievably lost. This issue should be of concern. This assertion is intended to provoke a profound response, emphasizing the temporal nature of existence and the imperative of utilizing time effectively. Life, in essence, is merely a succession of moments. The temporal economy of the individual is a matter of significant concern and one which must be addressed if the temporal exploitation of life is to be mitigated. The experience of retrospectively acknowledging the futility of one's daily activities can be a profoundly disconcerting phenomenon. It is not the case that the issue being discussed is one of being busy. The focus here is on the concept of intentionality. The act of rousing oneself from slumber and articulating the affirmation, "I shall undertake this task today, and I am cognizant of the underlying rationale," constitutes a pivotal component of the process. This kind of clarity has the potential to effect profound changes. The effect of the substance on the subject is to enhance energy levels. The effect of this phenomenon is to enhance cognitive abilities. It has been demonstrated to assist individuals in the ability to decline potential distractions. This approach has been demonstrated to enhance the efficacy of actions by making them stronger, faster, and more direct. The majority of individuals do not act with the intention of living in accordance with their principles. Their existence is characterized by a daily routine. The prevailing sentiments, behaviors, justifications, and grievances remain unaltered, and yet the participants continue to anticipate perpetual stagnation. The act of rousing oneself with a sense of purpose signifies the cessation of relinquishing one's temporal autonomy to external forces. It is imperative to disengage from the subjugation of the day and instead assume a position of command. Those who thrive, evolve, and exert a significant impact do not merely drift. They demonstrate a deliberate and purposeful approach to their growth and contributions. The decision is theirs to make. This decision is made at the moment of awakening. It is evident that individuals do not utilize the scrolling function on their mobile devices. They don't hit snooze. It has been demonstrated that they do not roam during the morning hours. They move with a reason. This mindset has the capacity to effect a complete reorganization of thought. Purpose gives you fire. This phenomenon is characterized by a distinct sensation that is experienced upon awakening, accompanied by a clear understanding of the pursuit at hand. The necessity of motivation is negated when a justifiable reason is present. This is a fundamental misunderstanding that the majority of people appear to be operating under. It is evident that they exercise restraint prior to undertaking any action, opting instead to await a state of heightened well-being. However, individuals who are driven by a sense of purpose do not engage in such hesitation. The act is preceded by the feeling. Consequently, the pursuit of a moment that is entirely without flaw is a futile endeavor. The creation of a moment is achieved by the execution of necessary tasks. It is recommended that, on a daily basis, the following question be posed. What am I constructing today? This is not congruent with the activities listed on the agenda, nor with the task that one might spontaneously select. The nature of the construction is not clear at this time. The cultivation of self-assurance is predicated on the fulfillment of commitments to oneself. The cultivation of strength is often associated with confronting challenges or activities that are typically eschewed. The construction of a future is achieved through the execution of present actions, which will ultimately be appreciated by one's future self. This is an illustration of the practical application of purpose in real-life contexts. This phenomenon cannot be reduced to a mere feeling. This decision is underpinned by a commitment to discipline. It is important to consider the importance of planning when one wishes to avoid entering a habitual pattern of behavior. That's why people feel stuck. That's why they feel tired. This phenomenon can be attributed to a decline in motivation. This phenomenon does not stem from a perception of unfairness in life. This is due to the fact that they exist without intention. It is possible to enhance one's quality of life by engaging in a more purposeful approach to the morning routine. The present moment is the time for action, not the distant future. It is imperative to assign a commensurate value to one's own time. It is imperative to acknowledge that the transition to a new phase in life is inevitable. The purpose of this undertaking need not be a grand mission. Start small, start real. One potential explanation for this phenomenon could be the subject's efforts to improve their physical fitness. It is possible that the subject is becoming more disciplined. It may be a matter of establishing an enterprise, rectifying one's financial situation, or modifying one's cognitive processes. It is imperative to align these aspirations with one's daily actions, thereby conferring a sense of urgency and immediacy to the endeavor. The adage, if it doesn't matter today, it won't matter at all, underscores the importance of immediate engagement. It is important to avoid an existence characterized by perpetual preparation for the future. This phenomenon exemplifies the unfortunate tendency for which individuals can squander the entirety of a lifetime. It is imperative to adopt a financial perspective when managing time. The question thus arises as to whether individuals would be willing to relinquish their last dollar to an individual who has not earned it. The question therefore arises as to why individuals should dedicate their limited time to activities that do not contribute to their personal growth. It is imperative to consider this perspective. The temporal dimension is the fundamental unit of currency in this context. It is imperative to utilize these funds judiciously. Investing in habits, thoughts, and actions that facilitate progress towards new destinations is recommended. The judicious utilization of time is conducive to the accumulation of momentum. This progression, in turn, becomes the momentum that drives the project forward. This progression fosters a sense of confidence. Furthermore, confidence fosters the development of a novel mindset. However, it is important to recognize that this process begins when one ceases to squander time. Upon awakening tomorrow, it is advisable to refrain from immediately accessing one's mobile device. It is imperative that the recipient does not check their messages. It is recommended that the subject remains in a stationary position for a period of approximately 3 minutes. Breathe. The following question should be posed. On which aspect should my focus be directed today? This is not a matter of urgency or of what is expected by the general public. What matters to you? The response to this single question has the capacity to affect a significant change in one's trajectory. It is imperative that this information is documented. It is imperative to establish a focal point. It is imperative to initiate the day by cultivating strength of character rather than responding impulsively to external stimuli. This approach is a key component in the process of reestablishing autonomy. It is important to acknowledge that there may be occasions when the motivation to engage in the activity is not present. That's normal. Nevertheless, it is imperative to recognize that discipline does not necessarily align with one's personal sentiments. The notion of acting in accordance with one's principles, even when such actions may be personally uncomfortable, is of paramount importance. Subsequently, this process leads to the formation of an individual's identity. The development of one's identity is significantly influenced by habitual behaviors. It is imperative to embody the qualities of strength, both in word and deed, irrespective of the presence or absence of observers. In order to achieve the desired level of focus, it is essential to eliminate all potential distractions and to address the tasks at hand with the requisite diligence. The phenomenon commences in a diminutive manner, yet with the passage of time and the recurrence of the process on a daily basis, it evolves into a permanent state. The prevailing discourse surrounding success often obscures its true nature, presenting it as a mystical entity rather than a tangible concept. The crux of the issue pertains to the cultivation of consistency in one's habits, with the objective of attaining a sense of purpose upon awakening. It is imperative to invest sufficient time in this endeavor while simultaneously cultivating a sense of self-discipline and respect for oneself. This is the final conclusion. The process is not complicated, but it takes work. This phenomenon is the primary reason why the majority of individuals remain static in their perspectives and behaviors. The subjects expressed a desire for the rewards to be received without the routine associated with them. But you're not most people. The presence of the individual in question is indicative of an awareness that there is a further dimension to the situation. It is evident that a considerable amount of time has been expended. You've delayed enough dreams. It is evident that the individual in question has repeatedly dismissed the notion of advancement, and it is imperative that this pattern is addressed. The objective is to initiate the day with a clearly defined mission. It is imperative to adopt a comportment that conveys the significance of the matter, as it undoubtedly does. It is imperative to recognize that there are individuals who place their trust in one's abilities and actions. Regardless of explicit articulation, the future is contingent on individual agency, and this becomes manifest only when action is taken. It is recommended that a new start be initiated on the following morning. It is imperative to rise early. Think clearly. It is imperative to move with intention and to begin the process of rewiring one's life, one habit at a time. The initial habit is straightforward. It is imperative to adopt a sense of purposeful urgency in order to optimize temporal efficiency. Achieving proficiency in this area is said to facilitate subsequent success in other domains. The second chapter of the study. It is imperative to engage in meticulous planning to ensure optimal time management, especially in the face of potential distractions. It is imperative to engage in meticulous planning to ensure optimal time management, especially in the face of potential distractions. This decision is likely to be one of the most beneficial for one's personal development, mental well-being, and future prospects. Upon physical contact with the floor, the individual is confronted with a plethora of stimuli, each competing for their attention. Individuals will be interested in your time. Notifications will be issued to request the user's attention. The mind will then begin to oscillate rapidly between these competing ideas. It is imperative to take ownership of one's day in order to avoid the possibility of external forces dictating one's agenda. The majority of people tend to act in a reactive manner. The course of their day is not determined by them. Their responses are contingent upon the manifest content. Individuals may engage in a variety of activities on their mobile devices, including accessing emails, scrolling through messages, and aligning their schedules with those of others. The subsequent events are yet to be ascertained. The most significant tasks are often neglected. The objectives remain unchanged. The stress levels escalate. The human mind has been shown to become overloaded with information, leading to a sense of confusion and a perception of time distortion. Jones, 2019. It is evident that such a lifestyle is not financially viable. It is imperative to recognize that this is not the case, provided one is earnest in their desire to effect a transformation in their life and to rewire their mindset, goals, focus, and habits. The outcome is contingent on the initial condition. The manner in which one plans one's day has been shown to influence the subsequent tone that is set. Jones, 2019. This is the method by which one maintains equilibrium. This approach entails the identification of the most appropriate means of achieving specific objectives, as opposed to merely maintaining a constant state of activity. It is important to note that being busy does not necessarily equate to being productive. It is possible to be preoccupied with tasks throughout the day and yet still find oneself falling behind. However, when deliberation and planning are employed prior to the onset of external distractions, progress is facilitated. It is possible to be preoccupied with numerous tasks throughout the day and yet still find oneself falling behind. However, when one is deliberate in one's actions and plans, and when one is able to move forward before the distractions arise, it is essential to have periods of silence. This state of being is characterized not only by physical silence, but also by mental clarity. This phenomenon occurs when individuals allocate a portion of their morning routine to deliberating their priorities. The subject is advised to sit down and take note of their top 3 goals for the day in a notebook. The onus is on the individual to determine their priorities, to methodically plan their schedule, to allocate time for their most important tasks, and to create an environment conducive to concentration. The aforementioned action results in a cessation of the relinquishing of control over one's life. It is a commonly overlooked fact that effective day planning can result in a greater sense of agency. This approach empowers the user by giving them control over the process. When you plan ahead, you remove guesswork. It is not a matter of idly contemplating the subsequent course of action. The decision has already been made. This distinction is pivotal in differentiating between progress and procrastination. Those who improvise tend to squander their opportunities. However, it is the responsibility of those who plan it to build it. Furthermore, an additional point is to be considered. The organization of one's daily schedule has been demonstrated to be an effective strategy for reducing anxiety. The human mind is capable of processing a limited amount of information at any given moment. An overload of information can cause a cognitive overload. It has been demonstrated that allocating a period of 5 to 10 minutes in the morning to the act of documenting one's thoughts can facilitate the development of clarity of thought. This is achieved by the process of focusing on the act of writing, thereby allowing the mind to unburden itself and think clearly. The process of self-direction is a fundamental aspect of human development. The practice of mindfulness has been shown to reduce overthinking by providing a structured framework that fosters mental clarity and peace of mind. Smith et al., 2022. The process need not be complicated. The necessity for sophisticated systems or numerous applications is thus negated. The fundamental prerequisite is the presence of intention. The act of awakening, taking a breath, and reflecting on the tasks to be completed in order to progress towards the desired life is an integral component of the morning routine. This fundamental question establishes the benchmark against which subsequent standards are measured. This question is pivotal in eliminating distractions. It is only when one has clarity on what matters that one should cease to pursue that which does not. The phenomenon of time wastage can be attributed to the lack of deliberation regarding priorities. These individuals transition between various activities, exhibiting reactions, responses, and assessments. By the conclusion of the day, their energy levels are significantly depleted. However, it is important to consider the potential benefits of planning ahead. One is invited to conceptualize the commencement of the day in which one is cognizant of that which merits one's attention. It is important to consider how best to allocate one's energy, and to do so from the outset of the day. This approach is instrumental in facilitating progress. It is evident that this approach fosters a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction at the conclusion of the day, thereby mitigating feelings of remorse. It is evident that planning fosters the development of discipline. The program instills a sense of time management and value. It is imperative to approach the management of one's working hours with the utmost respect. It is important to recognize that motivation should not be the primary factor in this process. Instead, reliance should be placed upon a well-structured framework. Indeed, effective planning can eliminate the need for last-minute preparation, thereby reducing stress and enhancing overall efficiency. The event has already been scheduled. It is imperative to recognize that adherence to this schedule constitutes a commitment. This is a pivotal aspect that warrants further examination. Commitment. This is not merely a matter of completing tasks, but rather a commitment to personal growth. It is an irrefutable fact that the cultivation of plants is rendered unfeasible when one's days are characterized by a state of perpetual noise and confusion. It is imperative to allocate time for contemplation in order to formulate effective solutions. It is imperative to allocate sufficient time for execution. The foundation for this process is the formulation of a structured plan. The act of taking a moment to reflect on one's daily schedule and consider the most effective use of one's energy is a practice that can benefit individuals in various ways. It is imperative to ascertain the specific tasks that are being evaded and require completion. It is imperative to ascertain the individual with whom I should establish a follow-up. Which potential distractions should be identified and eliminated today? It is precisely such questions that engender intellectual acumen. The function of these mechanisms is to ensure that the user does not lose focus or become distracted. This approach serves to maintain the momentum and commitment towards achieving one's objectives. The following assertion is made. The planning of one's daily routine has been demonstrated to facilitate the establishment of beneficial habits. Why? It is evident that habits do not simply form through repetition. These phenomena emerge from the clarity of the mind. It has been demonstrated that individuals are more likely to adhere to a course of action when they possess a clear understanding of the temporal parameters and the specific methodology involved. If the aspiration to read more is expressed, but no time is scheduled for this activity, it is likely to be neglected. However, if one were to state, I will read from 7 to 7:30 in the evening, then it would be considered more concrete. The creation of space for this phenomenon has been observed. This process is known as habituation. It is important to recognize that reliance on willpower alone is not sufficient. It is imperative to rely on the structure provided. Rely on clarity. In the event of life becoming disorderly, as it invariably must, one's plan functions as a stabilizing factor. It's what keeps you moving. It's what helps you win even on the hard days. If you only work when you feel great, you won't get far. But if you plan your time, you'll get results whether you feel like it or not. Now, I want you to think about this. If you don't control your time, someone else will. And usually it's not someone with your best interest in mind. That's why you need to take ownership from the very beginning of the day. Your goals, your mental health, your energy, they all depend on how you spend your time. And that starts with a plan. Your mindset gets sharper when you plan ahead. Your confidence grows because you stop living in chaos. You stop forgetting things. You stop feeling like the day got away from you. And that consistency, that sense of control, that's what builds a new identity. You start to see yourself differently, not as someone who's always behind, but as someone who's in charge, as someone who respects their time, as someone who shows up with focus. And that's powerful because once you shift how you use your time, you shift how you live. And once you shift how you live, your results change. Planning your day might sound small, but it touches everything. It touches your work. It touches your health. It touches your goals. It touches how you talk to people, how you treat yourself, how you feel when the day is over. It's not just a habit, it's a foundation. So if you want to rewire your mindset, start right here. Start tomorrow. Wake up and plan your day before the world gets to you. Sit with your thoughts. Write down your priorities. The selection of a focal point is a crucial aspect of this process. It is recommended that individuals approach their daily activities, let's say, with a sense of fortitude. It is imperative to approach this endeavor with meticulous control. It is imperative to proceed with a clear sense of direction. This approach enables individuals to transition from a state of merely surviving their days to one of purposefully building their lives. The implementation of a coherent plan is imperative. Chapter 3. It is recommended that the individual engages in self-talk in a manner consistent with the discourse employed towards individuals held in high esteem. It is recommended that the individual engages in self-talk in a manner consistent with the discourse employed towards individuals held in high esteem. This transition has the potential to profoundly impact an individual's lifestyle, thought processes, and global presence. It is evident that a continuous internal dialogue is engaged in on a daily basis. The phenomenon of individuals engaging in self-dialogue upon awakening has been well documented. The tendency to engage in judgment, comparison, criticism, and self-questioning can have a detrimental effect on one's sense of self-worth, a fact that is often not recognized by the individual. This phenomenon is not unprecedented. However, it is frequently characterized by a marked impatience and negativity. It is evident that if an individual were to address another in the manner in which we address ourselves, we would be compelled to terminate the interaction. However, the tendency to heed the internal voice is perpetuated by an absence of learning to address oneself with the same respect bestowed upon others. In order to effect a change in one's mindset, it is first necessary to initiate a shift in one's internal language. The process of developing self-confidence cannot be achieved through self-criticism. The cultivation of strength is not achieved through the installation of doubt. It is an irrefutable fact that one cannot create a better life for oneself by constantly berating oneself with the belief that one is not worthy of a better life. The manner in which an individual speaks to themselves has been demonstrated to influence their self-perception. The manner in which an individual perceives themselves has a significant impact on their expectations of life. It is imperative to be mindful of the language employed when reflecting on one's own identity. It is pertinent to consider whether such statements would be expressed to a friend held in high esteem. It is important to consider whether it would be ethically sound to inform an individual that they are lazy, worthless, or not good enough. The question is posed as to whether the subject would exhibit a dismissive gesture in response to an attempt to introduce a new concept or an error in execution. This is not the case. The question must therefore be posed: why is this the case? It is imperative that this practice is brought to an end. This approach does not assist the reader in understanding the subject matter. It holds you back. The issue at hand is that the problem persists in maintaining a minimalist identity, and this in turn becomes the individual's defining characteristic. If the problem is not addressed, the consequences are potentially far-reaching. The practice of self-respect, as conceptualized in this context, does not entail the pursuit of ego. The objective is not to feign perfection. The act of self-kindness, patience, and encouragement is of paramount importance. The objective is not to feign perfection. The act of self-kindness, patience, and encouragement is of paramount importance, as it is the foundation for fostering a positive and productive environment. Errors have been committed. This phenomenon is not exclusive to the individual in question. It is evident that you have not succeeded in achieving the desired outcome in a number of areas. This phenomenon is not exclusive to the individual in question. Nevertheless, the author's presence remains unchanged. You're still trying. This observation is noteworthy. This approach merits respect. This phenomenon merits more sophisticated conceptualizations. It has been demonstrated that when an individual engages in self-directed speech in a manner akin to that of a person who is held in high esteem, a concomitant alteration in posture becomes evident. The subject's decisions become more pronounced. It is at this point that the individual begins to believe in the possibility of change. The necessity to settle for less is thus negated. It is imperative to cease tolerating the factors that engender unhappiness. The process of self-actualization entails a selection of attributes that contribute to one's personal growth, as opposed to those that engender detrimental effects. This transformation can be initiated by a single, straightforward modification: the internal voice. It is an uncomplicated matter to permit one's internal dialogue to become unrestrained. A minor error can lead to a perception of consistent failure. The failure to convert a single goal opportunity into a successful outcome can be indicative of a general tendency to lack of commitment. This kind of discourse is detrimental to progress. This process effectively transforms short-term setbacks into long-term characteristics. It is important to note that, in such cases, the shame experienced by the individual is often misplaced. Respect can be defined as the quality of being honest and fair. It is possible to acknowledge one's missteps without self-destructive self-labeling. It is possible to aspire to enhancement without perceiving oneself to be in a state of disrepair. The mind is capable of processing auditory information even when the content is a joke. The act of self-labeling as lazy has been demonstrated to have a significant impact on one's cognitive processes. The assertion that an individual lacks intelligence can, in fact, have a self-fulfilling prophecy as the mind begins to accept this belief. It is evident that once a belief is reiterated on a sufficient number of occasions, it becomes an integral component of one's behaviors. It is imperative to replace negative self-talk with language that fosters resilience and strength. It is not necessary to adopt an excessively positive or contrived demeanor. Accurate and constructive contributions are essential for the effective functioning of this forum. It is imperative to become adept at identifying and challenging the automatic negative thoughts that frequently manifest. It is imperative that these symptoms are not disregarded. The following is an example of the kind of self-assessment that can be made when one is not performing to one's own satisfaction. I'm not good at. It is imperative to acknowledge that the acquisition of proficiency in any domain is an ongoing process. I will improve. The following is a suggestion for when the reader is confronted with a situation which they are unable to manage. I can't handle this. The alteration to the statement is as follows: this is challenging, but I have experience in dealing with difficult situations. That's not fluff. This is an example of mental training. This is an example of cognitive dissonance. It is important to consider how one would address a child who is in the process of acquiring language skills. It is important to note that reprimands are not to be delivered in a raised voice when an individual experiences a fall. It is important to avoid insulting individuals when they are not yet familiar with a particular concept. You guide them. It is imperative to provide encouragement to these individuals. The following instruction is to be given: try again. It is important to acknowledge the accomplishments of the students and to communicate to them that they are performing well. Persevere. The question to be posed here is, at what point in the past did the subject utter these very words to themselves? The act of self-criticism invariably serves to reinforce the belief that one is inadequate. However, it is important to recognize that affirming oneself through expressions of respect and encouragement serves to reinforce the notion that personal growth is indeed attainable. It is asserted that this veracity will serve as a source of solace and fortitude during the most arduous periods of one's existence. The practice of respectful self-talk has been demonstrated to engender mental toughness. This will be essential in times of adversity. Prior to my departure from the fleet, I personally observed numerous truths. The necessity for this will arise in circumstances where there is skepticism towards your abilities, where the attainment of results is protracted, and where trepidation becomes evident. In the event of mental resistance, the likelihood of cessation is increased. However, if an individual's internal voice is characterized by firmness, calmness, and clarity, they will be able to maintain their course. The individual will be prompted to reflect on the motivations that initially guided their actions. The subject will be prompted to acknowledge the value of persevering and to recognize that the challenges being faced are justified. This inner strength is metaphorically represented as a shield. The construction of the work is achieved through a meticulous process of word-by-word and thought-by-thought composition. It is a commonly held belief that adopting a stringent approach towards oneself serves to maintain self-discipline. However, it is important to distinguish between discipline and disrespect. Discipline can be defined as the mental process of setting goals and working towards them, driven by self-awareness and self-expectation. Disrespect can be defined as the belief that one is inadequate and therefore incapable of achieving success. One individual exerts an uplifting influence, while another engenders a state of weariness. In order to maintain consistency and resilience, it is essential to practice discipline without resorting to abusive behavior. It is imperative to recognize the significance of self-respect in this context. It is imperative to initiate the process of articulating the voice that one aspires to possess, particularly in circumstances where one encounters adversity. It is imperative to adopt an introspective stance, perceiving oneself as an individual who aspires to evolve, and progress, as opposed to a person who is destined to perpetrate the same errors time and again. It is imperative to recall the progress that has been made. It is imperative to emphasize the significance of goals, as this can serve as a catalyst for motivation and commitment. It is important to recognize and celebrate the effort that has been invested, rather than merely focusing on the final outcomes. This is the foundation for cultivating self-confidence. Self-assurance is the cornerstone of authentic confidence. It is evident that self-assurance does not stem from accomplishments. This phenomenon is rooted in the relationship one has with oneself. The utilization of encouragement, honesty, and patience in communication fosters the development of self-support. The possession of personal support engenders a state in which the need for external validation is diminished. You stop chasing praise. The process of self-actualization entails the cessation of fear regarding the potential for judgment. It is evident that one commences their journey through life with a quiet but undeniable sense of potency. Subconsciously, the individual is aware of their own resilience and ability to protect themselves. It is important to acknowledge that perfection is unattainable. It is inevitable that there will be occasions when one experiences a lapse in concentration. It is inevitable that individuals will encounter periods where negative thoughts become overwhelming. That's normal. However, the crux of the matter lies in the manner in which one responds to such circumstances. The question is whether the individual will remain entrenched in that particular mindset, or whether they will interrupt the thought process, correct the erroneous thought, and substitute it with a more robust thought. Each correction represents a progression towards a more accurate and effective model. It is evident that benevolent communication constitutes a fundamental element in the edifice of human relationships. Subsequently, the prevailing patterns become less entrenched over time. It is imperative to exercise caution when engaging in self-dialogue. It is important to note the language used. It is imperative to observe the energy present. The cultivation of a new habit of speaking with respect is imperative. It is imperative to articulate oneself in such a manner that it conveys a genuine desire to witness one's triumph. It is imperative to articulate oneself in a manner that reflects an unwavering conviction in one's own capabilities. It is imperative to articulate oneself in a manner that conveys both the awareness of pending obligations and the confidence in one's ability to execute them effectively. The notion of perpetual self-awareness is a fundamental tenet of the human experience. The auditory experience is characterized by an acute awareness of one's verbal utterances. It is imperative to ensure that the words chosen serve to propel one forward rather than hindering progress. It is not necessary to achieve perfection. It is imperative to maintain authenticity. The notion of reality can be defined as the act of treating oneself with dignity, even in circumstances of adversity. This shift in perspective has been identified as a key factor in the rewiring of the individual's cognitive framework. This is the practice that distinguishes the individual from their former self. The subject has invested a considerable amount of time in the act of listening to doubt. The necessity to construct a superior alternative is becoming increasingly apparent. The approach is to proceed word by word. The approach to be adopted here is to consider each thought in isolation. The decision-making process is to be approached on an individual basis. It is proposed that by engaging in self-talk in a manner that mirrors the manner in which one would talk to a figure of respect, the individual in question will begin to embody the qualities that they seek in a role model. It is at this juncture that authentic transformation can be initiated. Chapter 4. It is imperative to take action when the mind suggests procrastination, it is imperative to act in accordance with the prevailing sentiment, even when it is to the fore that procrastination is a more appealing option. The phenomenon of one's own thoughts prompting the adoption of a state of indecision, characterized by the deliberation of options and the deferral of a decision, is a phenomenon that has been observed. This juncture marks the precise moment when the trajectory of one's future is irrevocably determined, not in the distant future or in the temporal proximity of a week or more, but in that precise instant. The emergence of an idea that is opposed by an individual's internal resistance can be conceptualized as a metaphorical wall that obstructs the individual's ability to fully actualize their potential. The majority of individuals do not prevail in this endeavor, not due to any inherent weakness, but rather as a consequence of their acceptance of the imposed delay. The voice that responds with "not now" is regarded with trust. It is evident that the subjects of this study are not cognizant of the fact that their inability to progress is directly attributable to their utilization of the voice. It is important to note that delays do not necessarily manifest as fear. On occasion, they present themselves in a manner that appears to embody rationality. The present state of exhaustion is a consequence of this. I anticipate feeling more prepared by tomorrow. The present moment is not conducive to this endeavor. It is imperative to allow for a period of rest and recuperation prior to any further activity. This assertion appears to be substantiated by the voice, which is perceived as reasonable. This phenomenon evokes a sense of protection, which is a notable aspect of the experience. However, in reality, this tendency can be attributed to a habitual tendency towards hesitation. It is imperative to challenge such habits, as failure to do so will result in their exacerbation. It is important to recognize that procrastination can become entrenched in one's daily routine over time. Ultimately, one's ability to rely on oneself in the pursuit of one's goals is gradually eroded. It is imperative to approach any construction project with unwavering determination and commitment, forgoing any inclination towards hesitation or uncertainty. It is not possible to develop one's potential by evading one's responsibilities. It is not possible to become one's best self while continually postponing tasks. This particular habit, which involves acting in accordance with one's thoughts, represents a significant breakthrough. The crux of the issue is not motivation per se, but rather the response. The initial few seconds during which the brain issues a pause signal represent the optimal time for action. This is not a matter of spontaneous inclination. Rather, it is the consequence of a deliberate decision to embody the qualities of an individual who consistently fulfills their commitments. The true challenge resides internally. It is evident that the appropriate course of action is known to the individual concerned. The notion has been thoroughly considered. The planning of this event is evident. However, when the opportune moment arises, the negotiation process commences. This is the trap. The human mind is wont to attempt to negotiate its way out of states of discomfort. It is imperative to be expeditious in order to avoid the utilization of justifications. The duration of the window is limited, seconds. In some cases, individuals may find themselves unable to proceed due to a state of mental hesitation, which can result in a cessation of action. The following assertion is made with the utmost conviction. It is evident that whenever an individual elects to act despite a lack of inclination, they are effectively cultivating discipline. The transmission of a message to the brain is initiated, signifying an assumption of control. The necessity of optimal conditions is negated in such circumstances. It is not necessary to expend significant levels of energy. It is not necessary to allocate additional time. The initiation of the process is the fundamental prerequisite. The decision in question has the potential to generate significant momentum. Furthermore, momentum is a significant factor in this regard. Upon initiation of the process, a series of transitions ensue. The phenomenon of energy manifests itself. The clarity that was previously absent has now returned. The task that was previously perceived as onerous no longer appears to be so. The initial stage of the process was the most challenging. It is important to consider how many of one's current activities could have already reached completion had one commenced them at the appropriate time. The ongoing deferral of the aforementioned discussion is a matter of concern. The task to which reference is continually made. This goal, which one had previously committed to working on several months prior, was the subject of discussion. This is not due to a lack of knowledge. The absence of time is not the cause of the undoing. The current state of affairs is the result of a delay. The tendency to procrastinate can prove more detrimental to the pursuit of one's aspirations than direct failure. It is important to recognize that the longer one waits, the more challenging the situation becomes. It has been demonstrated that even the most straightforward of tasks can, over time, become a source of frustration and even a burden to the individual. The transition from a one-hour job to a more mentally demanding role can be a significant change. With the passage of time, the initial weight evolves into a sense of guilt. The subsequent cognitive process may involve the following thought: why is it not possible for me to simply do it? However, the crux of the issue lies not in one's innate ability, but rather in the adherence to a specific pattern. The subject has become habituated to a state of comfort. The pathway was constructed in such a manner that it conveyed the message that, in the event of discomfort, the pathway should be avoided. However, the pursuit of comfort is not the primary objective in this context. The purpose of this institution is to facilitate the growth of its students. It is evident that growth is only attainable when one takes action. You won't feel ready. It is imperative to cease anticipating that outcome. It is widely acknowledged that the majority of significant advancements are made when individuals proceed despite reservations. The human mind is naturally inclined towards seeking safety and security. The soul's inherent desire for expansion frequently becomes a point of contention. This internal discord is the underlying cause of the feelings of internal conflict experienced by the individual. However, it is important to recognize that opting for movement over inaction can lead to the development of a more resilient version of oneself. The result is a reliable and dependable individual. The individual in question is not one to be dissuaded by feelings of uncertainty. The efficacy of undertaking minor tasks in an expeditious manner is well documented. The act of rousing oneself from slumber at the resonant strike of the alarm. The following is a response to the electronic communication that has been repeatedly postponed. The commencement of the exercise regime, the initiation of the book, and the adoption of a seated posture for the purpose of study. These elements may appear insignificant, yet they are of considerable importance. These actions serve as evidence that an individual is developing the capacity to execute their ideas. This consistency has the capacity to effect a transformation of one's identity. The act of taking action in the face of opposition has been demonstrated to result in an augmentation of self-respect. The process of self-reflection and reevaluation becomes a continuous and ongoing process, rather than a one-time action. The subject begins to perceive themselves as an individual who is able to accomplish tasks in a satisfactory manner. The process of self-critique and self-improvement is a catalyst for long-term transformation. It is only possible to respect oneself if one lives in a manner that is consistent with one's objectives. This entails resisting the temptation to succumb to procrastination, particularly in instances where one has made a commitment to self-improvement. This issue does not pertain to the question of speed. The crux of the matter pertains to intention. It is not necessary to undertake all tasks simultaneously. It is imperative to act when one's mind attempts to engage in procrastination. This is the established protocol. In the event of such hesitation, it is advisable to refrain from engaging in debate. It is not advisable to engage in debate on this matter. It is inadvisable to remain in the situation. It is imperative to take action. Each step, movement, and decision is a component of this intricate and nuanced process. It is imperative to disrupt the established pattern before it evolves into a recurrent cycle. It is not necessary to allocate additional time. It is imperative to exhibit a greater degree of assertiveness. This is a fact that is not widely recognized. It is hypothesized that the subjects are anticipating a more opportune moment. However, it is surmised that their actions are in fact indicative of a strategy of avoidance. The adage that practice makes perfect holds true in this context. It is imperative to cease the rehearsal of the delay. The subsequent stage of the process is the execution of the practice. It is imperative to cultivate the ability to persevere, even in the face of adversity. Practice courage in motion. Delayed gratification can be a source of frustration and dissatisfaction. When an individual elects to postpone addressing a matter, the act of avoidance serves to perpetuate its presence within the individual's cognitive framework. This phenomenon is characterized by a gradual and pervasive depletion of energy, occurring discreetly and often unconsciously. The message that was not sent, the decision that was not made, the task that was not finished. These are not consigned to oblivion. Rather, they persist, and with each recollection, the level of stress experienced is increased. However, immediate handling of these materials has been shown to enhance cognitive function. Smith et al. 2022. The creation of such an environment fosters the development of focus, creativity, and confidence. The objective is not to achieve perfection. The crux of the matter pertains to the notion of presence. The act of postponement engenders a state of perpetual deferral, perpetuating a recurrent cycle of procrastination. However, the notion of a sometime is a fallacy. The present moment is the only one that exists. The present moment marks the commencement of a new era. Should one elect to undertake training with the objective of cultivating the capacity to respond expeditiously to the onset of hesitation, one will be in a position to reestablish a sense of agency. It is imperative to cease perceiving oneself as a victim of one's emotions. The notion of awaiting a state of existence that is characterized by a sense of emotional and psychological equilibrium is relinquished. The cultivation of a favorable sentiment is predicated upon the undertaking of appropriate actions. It is imperative to recognize that the pursuit of desired outcomes necessitates the implementation of specific actions. The attainment of goals is not contingent upon intention. Rather, it is the result of effective execution. It is imperative to act promptly in order to capitalize on these opportunities, as they may not be available in the future. The energy dissipates. The momentum is lost. It is imperative to act expeditiously in order to counteract the aforementioned effects. The decision can be reconsidered at a later point. At this juncture, the necessity of movement is paramount. The process is initiated by the subject. The subject's presence is noted. This is the fundamental distinction between those who demonstrate growth and those who remain static. It is important to recognize that a high level of control is available to the individual. However, it is important to recognize that control is derived from action. It is not possible to effect change by means of thought alone. It is imperative to adopt a proactive approach in order to achieve this objective. It is important to note that, regardless of whether the situation is uncomfortable, inconvenient, or unfamiliar, the next level of the process is invariably concealed by the element that is being continually evaded. It is imperative to recognize that the only means of achieving this objective is to overcome the resistance encountered without any hesitation. Consequently, when confronted with procrastination, it is advisable to resist the inclination to defer action. It is imperative to acknowledge the true nature of this phenomenon. This assertion, however, lacks validity. This is a test. This is a test of commitment, priorities, and mindset. The most appropriate response to this issue is to take action. Not perfect action, just action. The starting point is the current location. The utilization of available resources is a fundamental principle. One must act in accordance with one's capabilities, whilst also demonstrating adaptability. This habit has the capacity to effect profound change. It is not always easy to act when one feels that procrastination is the better option, but it is a necessary part of the process. The ability to successfully navigate this moment is indicative of the capacity to exercise mastery over one's progress. It is an established fact that, when a given action is performed with sufficient frequency, the brain undergoes a process of reorganization, resulting in the formation of new neural connections. The concept of delay becomes less significant. It is evident that the utilization of excuses can diminish one's efficiency, leading to a transformation in one's behavior, thereby emulating an individual who consistently achieves their objectives. This phenomenon is not a one-time occurrence, but rather a recurrent theme. The issue is of significance. This is the kind of person who is likely to prevail. This is the kind of life that is worthy of being built. The approach to be adopted is to undertake each action sequentially. Chapter 5. It is imperative to exert maximum effort in order to complete any task that is initiated on the present day. It is imperative to exert maximum effort in order to complete any task that is initiated on the present day. This approach is conducive to the development of character. This approach is conducive to the establishment of a distinct identity, thereby differentiating oneself from the prevailing crowd. The initiation of this process is open to all individuals. The majority of individuals do. While the act of initiation is uncomplicated, it is the act of finalization that truly distinguishes one from their peers. It is precisely in these areas that authentic growth occurs. This phenomenon occurs not during moments of excitement and freshness, but rather in the quiet hours when it becomes challenging to maintain concentration. This period of self-discovery is often the catalyst for the realization of one's true identity. Whenever one attempts to remain consistent in their endeavors, it becomes evident that there are invariably factors that act as a source of distraction, leading to a disruption in focus. Such factors may include distractions, doubt, boredom, or discomfort. However, it is imperative to cultivate the ability to maintain concentration even in circumstances that may no longer be inherently engaging, even when confronted with challenges that appear insurmountable. And even when the inclination is to cease and recuperate, it is imperative to cultivate the kind of resolve that dictates, if I commence this undertaking on the present day, I shall conclude it on the same day. It is an established fact that the act of leaving tasks unfinished can have a detrimental effect on one's psychological well-being. The subject may attempt to convince themselves that the issue is of little consequence. It is not uncommon for individuals to adopt a tomorrow I will attend to it mindset. However, it has been demonstrated that unfinished work can result in mental clutter. The experience is often characterized by a lingering sense of unease, which can persist in the mind long after the initial occurrence. The phenomenon of pressure is thus engendered. The issue is that it diverts attention. With the passage of time, the issue will gradually erode one's sense of self-assurance. It is at this point that the subject begins to experience a decline in self-assurance with regard to their aptitude for completing the task. It is evident that the tendency to perceive oneself as someone who is prone to resigning prematurely becomes entrenched over time, ultimately manifesting as a habitual belief. It is imperative to combat this tendency, as the manner in which one action is undertaken frequently becomes the model for subsequent actions. It is important to recognize that any compromises made in minor details will inevitably extend to more significant aspects. This underscores the importance of maintaining momentum and concluding the season on a strong note. The endeavor is not driven by the pursuit of a result or the acquisition of a reward. Rather, it is motivated by the intrinsic value of integrity. The objective is to demonstrate to oneself that it is not necessary to feel flawless in order to accomplish one's stated objectives. Occasionally, a lack of motivation may be experienced. The human mind has a tendency to offer a plethora of justifications. The subject is fatigued. The subject has already completed the requisite actions. It is evident that the program is not being monitored. It can wait. It is at this juncture that the necessity to exert pressure becomes apparent. This is not due to any consideration of convenience, but rather because the standards one holds oneself to are of greater importance than one's prevailing mood. Standards represent an individual's personal contract with oneself. In the event of the violation of the contract, the subject may experience a decline in self-confidence. The completion of a task, regardless of its identity, fosters the development of a cognitive advantage. This competitive advantage is likely to manifest itself in other areas of one's life. Completion of the aforementioned training program has been demonstrated to engender an enhancement in conversational prowess. The successful completion of this project will engender a sense of confidence that will be advantageous when facing future challenges. The rectification of the disorder caused by the subject will facilitate enhanced cognitive clarity in all other matters. The ability to maintain focus and commitment becomes the prevailing norm. The ability to adhere to one's stated commitments, particularly in the face of challenges and a lack of external accountability, is a noteworthy accomplishment. This is because it is at this point that an individual becomes their own leader. It is at this juncture that the necessity for external motivation is rendered obsolete. It is at this juncture that the discipline in question becomes internalized. Furthermore, when discipline originates from within the individual, a state of unstoppable capability is achieved. It is not necessary for the system to be perfect. It is unnecessary to provide further motivation. It is imperative that the situation is addressed with urgency. This approach is not to be characterized as being in a state of haste or panic. Rather, it is to be understood as being in a state of clarity and awareness. The individual then reflects on their day, posing the question, what tasks must be completed? Then you do it. The present moment is of paramount importance. The future is not to be considered. It is imperative to undertake this process in its entirety. The act of finishing does not occur in half the time. It is imperative that no pieces are left behind. The completion of this process is indicative of the individual's evolving identity. The act of completing a task has been demonstrated to engender clarity. When an individual perceives a concept in its entirety, a sense of completion is experienced, signifying the closure of a cognitive loop. The aforementioned source asserts that this matter has been addressed. This resolution provides a foundation for future progress. However, unfinished business tends to persist in the mind, continually resurfacing. The phenomenon of recollecting actions not completed by oneself is a recurring theme. This process requires significant energy expenditure. A considerable number of individuals experience a sense of stagnation, and one of the primary factors contributing to this sense of stagnation is the wastage of energy. The subjects have initiated numerous projects but have not completed them. It is possible to reverse this process. The process of reclaiming one's energy can be achieved by confronting the activities that are typically evaded. The completion of tasks that have been neglected for extended periods can result in a sense of psychological respite. The process of completing additional tasks which has been demonstrated to result in a transformation of one's identity. The subject perceives an increase in their sense of self-efficacy, confidence, and ability to translate thoughts into actions. This approach is instrumental in the gradual accumulation of momentum, with each completed task contributing to the overall progression. The approach does not necessitate exaggeration. The necessity of this action is indisputable. In the event of undertaking a task, it is imperative to ensure its completion. In the event of undertaking a study period, it is imperative that this duration is adhered to. It is imperative that one does not cease writing abruptly, particularly if the composition has already begun. It is recommended that individuals allocate time for the completion of personal projects with the objective of achieving a sense of fulfillment. The pursuit of perfection is not the objective. The crux of the matter pertains to the notion of commitment. It is not necessary to execute all tasks in an impeccable manner. It is imperative to complete the tasks that have been initiated. This mindset is conducive to the cultivation of an approach to working with time, as opposed to an approach that is counterproductive and based on working against time. The majority of individuals often expend effort on tasks that are repetitive and unoriginal. The subjects continue until they reach the midpoint, at which point they make a conscious decision to pause and recommence the task at a later point. This approach is not efficient. This disrupts the flow of the game. However, upon completion of the present day, progression to the subsequent day ensues. The objective is to progress, as opposed to recycling. This is the strategy that enables individuals to achieve success. They demonstrate a remarkable ability to overcome hesitation, a crucial aspect of their professional competence. The execution of the task is accomplished without undue delay, ensuring that the day's activities are not encumbered by the need for additional time. It is imperative to view all activities as opportunities to reinforce established standards. Upon completion, the standard is elevated. The act of stopping early results in a reduction. The process is uncomplicated. It is not necessary to expend excessive cognitive effort on this matter. It is imperative to conclude the task that has been initiated. It is important to refrain from analysis. Don't wait for inspiration. It is imperative to avoid stagnation and to instead take action, ensure completion, and progress. This mindset fosters emotional resilience, transcending the mere anticipation of outcomes. The process of constructing these models is incremental, with each constituent element being added sequentially. It is not necessary to exercise additional discipline on the morrow. The necessity for decision-making in the present moment is paramount. The decision to proceed when it would be more prudent to pause. The decision to focus when distractions are present. The decision to close the chapter that was opened by the previous contributor. The significance of these minor achievements should not be underestimated. The evidence suggests that they are indeed stackable. These characteristics, when cultivated, serve to enhance one's position. These qualities serve as the foundation for confidence in facing new challenges. The majority of individuals find themselves entrenched in a perpetual cycle of incompleteness. There is no obligation to do so. It is possible to disrupt this cycle in the present moment. The process commences with a single task, a solitary moment, and a solitary push. It is imperative to recognize that the sense of accomplishment derived from perseverance is often more fulfilling than achieving an unfinished goal. It is imperative to acknowledge that progress rarely originates from straightforward beginnings. This is attributable to the presence of hard finishes. It is evident that the subject has initiated numerous endeavors in their lifetime. It is evident that a proportion of the tasks have been completed, whilst others remain unfinished. This is an acceptable outcome. From this juncture onwards, it is imperative to determine that any activity that demands your time and attention today will receive your undivided attention. It is imperative to ensure that the process is not left incomplete. It is imperative to address this issue without further delay. The present moment is the opportune time to undertake this action. This approach is instrumental in fostering one's own sense of self-respect. This approach is conducive to maintaining clarity of thought. This approach is conducive to achieving victory in a discrete, methodical, and comprehensive manner. It is imperative to motivate oneself not in response to deficiencies in one's current situation, but rather in recognition of the potential for growth and advancement that lies dormant within. It is imperative to exert pressure on the relevant parties, as the significance of the day cannot be overstated. It is imperative to persevere in one's endeavors, for those who aspire to become the person they wish to be must not be encumbered by procrastination, uncertainty, or unresolved tasks. This version of the self is characterized by its embodiment of action, clarity, and fulfillment. The version of the software is constructed on the basis of the final outcome. Chapter 6. It is imperative to reject activities that deplete one's energy levels. It is imperative to reject activities that deplete one's energy levels. The aforementioned decision has the potential to engender a sense of calm, enhance one's concentration, and restore a sense of agency over one's life. The contemporary individual is perpetually subjected to conflicting demands, resulting in a state of perpetual dissonance. Individuals seek to utilize your time. Devices demand the user's attention. It is important to recognize that habitual practices may be adopted which are not conducive to one's well-being. It is important to be aware that unproductive activities can result in the depletion of personal energy. This is not indicative of personal weakness. Rather, it is the consequence of an absence of training in the art of articulating refusal with strength and clarity. The prevailing assumption is that energy is derived solely from sleep, sustenance, and rest. However, it is imperative to recognize the intrinsic interconnection between one's energy and its manifestation in various aspects of life. These aspects include, but are not limited to, personal boundaries, life priorities, and the capacity to exercise discernment in one's choices.